Alabama trying to get into the college football playoff. We're going to talk to Thom Abraham about that. Welcome to the original Bama Football Tailgate Show. If you're not part of what we do here, make sure that you like and subscribe, and let's talk Alabama. All right, there he is from 97.7 ESPN The Zone in Huntsville, our buddy Thom Abraham. I'm Mick Gillispie. Thom, let's get into this, man. You have been the voice of the Crimson Tide. You're saying that there is no chance on God's green earth that Alabama doesn't get in if they beat Georgia.
I don't want to say no chance on God's green earth. I don't go that far, but I've been beating the drum for this because when you close your eyes, there's just a number of things that you have to deal with. And part of it is now we're facing with the situation where if Alabama wins that football game and it's a 12-1 SEC champ, I'm just trying to imagine a world where the 12-1 SEC champ that would be 5-1 against top 30 teams in the most difficult conference in the land, period, end of story. I don't care about a couple of losses early in the season in non-conference games, that you leave that team out of the playoffs. It would be a sham. I mean, it would be an absolute travesty to not have an SEC team. And I think it would be devastating to the ratings, to be honest with you, without them. If Alabama, obviously Georgia with a win, they're going to be the number one seed overall. I think there are a couple of scenarios, depending on how everything falls out, where both Alabama and Georgia can still end up in there. I know a lot of people are saying there's no way, no team has ever jumped from 8 to into the playoff on the last weekend. How do you justify keeping a 12-1 SEC champ that beat the number one team in the country that had won 29 straight? How can you possibly keep that team out of the playoff? It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, it's been annoying to me watching the college football playoff release each week and waiting for Alabama to move. They've been stuck at 8. It feels like the committee is purposely leaving them back there, to me, to keep them out of contention for the playoff. But if you beat Georgia and you've won all of these games and you look at somehow Oregon being ahead of Alabama and Texas, to me is baffling when you look at the strength of the conference itself and the players and the teams that they have in the Pac-12, which, by the way, is dissolved now. And you compare it to what you have to go through in the SEC, the fact that the Pac-12 hasn't won a championship in some people's lifetimes that are watching this show right now, which makes me feel old. But we remember that USC at one point was a winner, but that was a long time ago. And the SEC is dominated. And Alabama lost 2 of the first 3 players in the NFL draft. It took a little while to reload, and now they're reloaded. How do you keep them out?
Yeah, and the Pac-12, I think there's some sentiment involved here. I think there's some romance and sentiment, and being that this is the end of the Pac-12, and they're getting a little bit extra love from that. And these early season polls, the AP and the coaches poll and the preseason polls and all of that, we like to say that none of that matters, but it creates a narrative. It's on ESPN. They're talking about it. They have the ranking next to the thing, and it was this narrative from the beginning that the Pac-12 was outstanding, that it was great. And they do have some great players out there, have some tremendous quarterbacks out there and so on. But I don't think the Pac-12 is I think the Pac-12 is what the Pac-12 always is. And I think there's a bunch of teams out there, their best teams are 3 or 4 lost teams in the SEC. It's the week in and week out grind. Could they beat anybody on a given day? Possibly. But it's the week in and week out grind. And look, in my lifetime, the Pac-12, you talk about, people have been on outside of USC. Nobody's ever won a national championship. I'm 63 years old, and they don't have a national championship from 1960. I call it the big dog era. From 1960, they got one team, and that team is in the Big Ten now. Yeah. It's absolutely crazy. And then there's the Florida State issue. Look, Alabama plays Florida State's schedule; they're unbeaten. If they play most of these teams' schedules, they're unbeaten. But Florida State, with or without the quarterback, Jordan Travis, I think that they're a little bit of a sham. But it's like, what do you do if they beat Louisville and they're 13-0? ACC champ at 13-0. This is where we're getting hung up on the 4 best teams in the country or the 4 most deserving teams in the country.
Right. We did the deserving last year, and it got us the worst national championship game we're ever going to see in our life.
Exactly. And they've done it years past. I mean, Michigan State getting in there and, and Alabama thumping them 38-0 or whatever that was. We've seen it with Ohio State that didn't deserve to be in there one year and they got destroyed. It's you get hung up on that. And this chaos, it's interesting that it's happening the last year before, because it's legit. There's 6 or 8 teams that should be in, and it's happening the last year before we go to 12. So yeah. The real lunacy is, and I've spent some time on this during this week on my show, the real lunacy is the fact that if this was next year and it was 12, you're using these ratings and it's next year, and we're going to be stuck with 6 plus 6 for 2 years, the 6 highest ranking conference champs. You take Texas out of the Big 12, Oklahoma State is in, and they're the number 18 team in the country. Tulane is in. They're the number 22 team in the country. And who was the other one? Liberty is in, and they're the number 24 team in the country. So you're going to have 18, 22, and 24 in. Texas would be a at-large team. Washington would be an at-large team. Oregon would be an at-large team because those are Big Ten teams now. So they would all be at-large teams. And, you'd be leaving out people like Penn State and Oklahoma and Ole Miss, 10-win Ole Miss team. Those teams who are top 12 teams would be left out because you got to put in Oklahoma State, which got thumped by South Alabama, right? I mean, it's good. There's still going to be some work that needs to be done to get it fixed.
Yeah, I'm with you. We're actually doing the pre-segment for the tailgate show, which will air on Saturday. So it's here after this next question, I'm going to hit the music and we're actually going to go to Saturday.
Right.
But I want to ask you about the Oregon-Washington game because we're not going to talk about that. Obviously, it'll be over by the time the show airs on radio across the state. How does that game impact the college football playoff and Alabama? And the reason I ask that is that right now, both teams are ranked ahead of Alabama and Texas. And somehow Ohio State is ranked ahead of Alabama and Texas, which is another baffling.
Yeah.
But the absurdity of this committee. But without my bias in here, I want your bias. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think it's fascinating that Washington is ranked by this committee ahead of Oregon and ahead of all these other teams that you talked about. And Washington's a 9.5 point underdog to Oregon. I mean, 9.5 points in a college game, that's borderline, middle of the pack team against a top team. That's a lot of points, 9.5 points. So, I always lean towards Vegas. Vegas knows. They know what's real. And so, Oregon's a big favorite there. I think if Oregon hammers Washington, Washington obviously is knocked out of this thing. Washington will be sitting there and saying, well, we split with them. We split with those guys, and they were a top 5 team, and we split with them. So they're going to try and make a case. They're out. I think Oregon, if they go large in the game, they're going to have to be in there. The team that Alabama's going to end up jumping is going to be, I believe, Texas. Ohio State's out of the picture. They put them there now. That's fine, but they're not playing this week, so I think they'll fall out of the picture. The battle is going to be about that head-to-head game that happened on the second week of the season, and they're going to have to look at the overall resume, and they're going to have to decide whether or not that was an upset. Was that just an upset? Because you can't strictly go. They want to go head-to-head. Who beat who? Well, Oklahoma beat Texas. Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma. South Alabama beat Oklahoma State. So we're going to say the team that got beat by the team that was South Alabama. Because of that, we're going to keep an Alabama team out that has improved greatly, throughout the year. So it'll be interesting. I think it is an elimination game out there. Washington, Oregon. I think there are 2 playoff games this weekend. I think Alabama, Georgia is a playoff game, and okay. I think that Oregon, Washington is a playoff game. I mean, I think that those are playoff games. The winners of those 2 games moves on, and the loser is very, very likely out, including Georgia, if it happens.
All right. Well, let's go to Saturday, and let's talk Alabama and Georgia. Welcome back to the original Bama Football Tailgate Show as we preview Alabama and Georgia, the SEC championship game. That is at 3 o'clock in Atlanta as the Crimson Tide look for their 30th SEC championship. And Nick Saban trying to keep his streak of winning these SEC championship games going. The last one Alabama lost was 2008 to Tim Tebow in Florida. So Alabama's been great in this game. Let me remind you guys that the Tailgate Show is presented by VisitSevierville.com.
See yourself in Sevierville, Tennessee. Your Smokies start here.
Great time to be in the Smokies with all the Christmas lights. Dollywood's got its thing going on as well. Great restaurants. I was just up there a couple of weeks ago. It was fantastic. And I love this time of year in the mountains with the colors changing and everything else. You can find out all the information you need at visitsevierville.com/fall. He's Thom Abraham from 97.7 ESPN The Zone in Huntsville, North Alabama, on the show each week. And Tom, you've been the guy that's saying that if Alabama beat Auburn and Alabama beats Georgia, they're in. They're stuck at number 8 right now. Do you still think Alabama's in if they win this game?
I do. I mean, it would have been nice to see a little bit more convincing win against Auburn, instead of having to break out the gravedigger to get the victory. And, but they did win the game. What have I been saying all season long? Survive and advance, right? So I think survive and advance is still alive. I truly believe the SEC championship game is a playoff game. Winner is in, loser is out. Even if it's Georgia, I think loser is likely out, depending on how everything is going on over this weekend and how much more chaos there would be. But in the big picture, again, we'd be talking about, if we're talking at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock tonight, about a 12-1 SEC champ that knocked off the number 1 team in the country that hadn't lost a game in 29 games since they lost to Alabama a couple of years ago in the SEC championship game. If we're talking about that team, and you're going to tell me you're going to have a college football playoff without that team, it's ludicrous. It would be a sham. It would be hard to sell. I think from a marketing standpoint, it would be crazy. I think the ratings would be the lowest ratings they ever had. I know there's SEC fatigue out there, but to beat a king, you got to beat the king. And when the SEC has won, Alabama and Georgia, between the two of them, have won, 5 of the last 7 national championships, something like that. And the SEC has won so many since 2007. They've won all but 2 or 3 of these national championships. Now you're telling me that you're not going to take the 12-1 SEC champ? It would be crazy. I can't see it happening. They'll figure out a way to get them in there. So I do believe that this is a playoff game.
Georgia hasn't lost in a while. We've talked a lot about how Alabama wins, they should be in, but they've got to beat a team that's won 29 straight games. And that streak started against Alabama when they beat them in the national championship game back. Well, I guess it happened before that, right? Because they had to get into the championship game. But they beat Alabama.
They lost and got in, and then they had to rematch and beat them. So, their last loss was to Alabama in the SEC.
Was the last loss. Yeah, there was a game in between those two games, But right. Despite that, these guys have won 29 straight. It's what's the record for SEC team to win 29. All those great Alabama teams over the year.
Right.
Over the years, Alabama was left out last season because of the 2 walk-off losses on the road at Tennessee, at LSU, and I thought that helped Georgia because I think last year's team could have beaten them. What about this year's team? What do you look at when you see Alabama and Georgia head to head?
Well, what I'm looking at is story number 1 will be these 2 young quarterbacks, these 2 first-year quarterbacks, and who handles this stage better. I mean, Carson Beck and Jalen Milroe are both improved greatly throughout the season. Now, Milroe's passer rating, believe it or not, is actually higher than Carson Beck's. Milroe's passer rating is about 179. Carson Beck's about 168. Beck has thrown for 1,000 yards more. He's thrown for 22 touchdowns. Milroe's thrown for 21 touchdowns. They both thrown 6 interceptions. So the numbers are fairly relative. The wild card is the fact that when you add back in the sack yardage, which should not go against rushing, it should go against passing. So when you add that sack yardage back into Jalen Milroe, he's run for 700 yards and 13 touchdowns. That's not part of Carson Beck's game. The other thing I look at is that with Georgia, they have been very susceptible to quarterbacks that are mobile this year. Peyton Thorne had 107 yards on 9 carries. Robbie Ashford had another 33 yards on 4 carries. They gave 10 yards a carry to the quarterbacks in that Auburn game. Jackson Dart had his best running game against them. The kid from Missouri, Brady Cook, had his best running game against them. Even last week against Georgia Tech, that kid averaged 10 yards per carry. That's the wild card. Milroe has to be a part of the running game, not just on scrambles. He has to be a part of the running game, especially with Jace McClellan running around on crutches. You know, we don't know what, if anything, they're going to get out of that guy. Right. So I think that that's a big part of it. And then the other part of it is, look, Alabama held LSU to 28 points. You know, since the 34 that Texas scored, they held everybody under 30. And LSU is the best offense in the country, and they held them to 28. So if they held LSU to 28, can they hold Georgia to 24 or 21 or 20, something like that? If they can keep Georgia in the mid to low 20s, they got a great chance, Alabama, of winning the football game. They got a tremendous chance of winning the football game. But they have to do that. And you got to remember still, I know that this is a Kirby Smart world now. I know that this is a Georgia Bulldog world now. He's beaten Nick Saban once. Georgia has beaten Alabama once in 15 years. Once, that national championship game. So there's still something there, you know, and that's what makes this a very, very intriguing game.
Yeah, no doubt. Look, I'm with you on that. And I love it when Alabama's underestimated. But what happened to Alabama's defense against Auburn on Saturday? Wow. I mean, why couldn't they stop the run? And the other part of it was Auburn had absolutely no pass game. They had to have a guy basically not covered to throw a touchdown pass, 5 of 16 passing. So they weren't even trying to throw the football. And Alabama was just getting destroyed at the line of scrimmage. I mean, Georgia's, I'm sure, going to go look and see all of that. And how does Alabama fix those problems?
Yeah, it was disturbing. I mean, because it was so easy, it looked like, for Auburn. And you're right, they were a one-trick pony. That's all they could do to hurt you was run the ball. And yet they lined up and they went man-to-man, and they were able to beat guys. There was a lot of linebackers. I went back and I looked at it, and I was a linebacker coach in college, and I was like, what was going on here that they had these gashes? I mean, just gashes in the Alabama defense. And what I saw was a lot of inside linebackers taking on blocks with the wrong shoulder. 2 guys in one gap, leaving another gap wide open. They lost their gap integrity during that game. Those are all things that Alabama can fix, because they've been good against the run for most of the season. So those are all things that can be fixed. They got to win those one-on-one battles up front, and it was a little bit startling to see some of the gashes that Auburn was able to get in that game. And of course, that's where, Georgia has to start with. The first thing they got to do is, be able to run the ball and then stop the quarterback run. So from their standpoint, that's what they're looking at, I'm sure.
Well, last time Alabama had a crazy win at Auburn, they beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. So I'm hoping that history repeats itself, but I'm sure Georgia and Kirby Smart trying to warn the team that it could happen again. But when you've won 29 straight, and everyone in the world thinks you're just unbeatable, Nick Saban calls that rat poison. And Alabama's on the other side of this right now. I feel like, first off, the disrespect from the playoff committee and the voters and the AP and the coaches poll to have Alabama at number 8 when they clearly should be higher than that. And then the spread, which is, like almost 7 now. And then you got, commentators saying Kirby Smart's better than Nick Saban. He's past Nick Saban. Just feels like a stew of rat poison.
Well, or the opposite of rat poison. In a way, the rat poison is on the Georgia side.
For Georgia,
Georgia side. Yeah, I get that. On the other hand, Kirby's a master. Remember when he said that everybody's saying we're a 7-5 team after the first year they went undefeated? That nobody was saying they were a 7-5 team. He convinced his team that the whole country was saying they were a 7-5 team. I think that all of this talk, for 4 weeks, 5 weeks now, the narrative has been if Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game. So nobody is really considering that Alabama doesn't win the game, even though they are now a 6.5, almost 7-point dog in the game. The reality, though, is I wonder if all of this talk and all of these scenarios about Alabama winning that game, Kirby Smart's got to be using that as motivation for his team. That they're all talking about what are you going to do with a 12-1 Alabama team? Well, you know what? It's going to be an 11-2 Alabama team, and they're not going to have to worry about them. So, because that's certainly look. You don't think that committee is pulling for Georgia big time? Yeah. They don't want to deal with a 12-1 Alabama team. Yeah, I even think that Greg Sankey, in his heart of hearts, is hoping that Georgia just goes in there, takes care of business, and beats Alabama. Because then he's got the number one team in the country, and there's no question. He doesn't want to sit there overnight and worry all night long what this committee is going to do with a 12-1 SEC champ and whether or not they're going to get in or not. I think all the muckety-mucks are pulling for Georgia. And those that want to see a little chaos in college football, and it's very subjective, are pulling for Alabama just to see, okay, what are we going to do with all these one-loss teams now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they can pull that same officiating crew that they used Saturday at Auburn and against Tennessee, and they probably get that. I don't even want to talk about how bad the officiating was in that game. But the one thing I do want to talk about is I know that Seth McLaughlin had a guy clap. I see it. It's on video. Yeah. Have they clapped all year long when he keeps snapping the ball and no one's ready? And if it's not on him, then it's on the offensive coordinator, because they're not using the head nod. They're not using the leg. There's a bunch of other ways that you could do this where instead of the clap. And Auburn, in that football game, that was a planned play. That was hey, if we get into a situation, run up and clap and see if it messes them up. It almost cost Alabama the football game. Yeah. You've been around football a long time. What would you do if you were them to fix this issue?
You can go silent, just go flat outside. The thing is, they don't have to deal with it now the rest of the way because it'll be neutral site, the rest of the way. So it's going to be, I think, a little bit different that way. But I would just go silent. They would have no clap. I would just go silent the rest of the way. Go with the leg lift and snap the ball. If the center is ready, they're going to go ahead and snap the ball. I think that's part of it. The officials have to be notified of it. You tell them ahead of time when you see things on film. By the way, the left tackle is very grabby. Can you keep an eye on him, please?
Yeah, right.
Their middle linebacker tends to, they tend to clap and they make it sound like they're clapping to get their own guys' attention, but they're really messing with the snap count. We've seen it a couple of times. We've seen some delay of games called, against the defense a few times on that. But just some of the blatant stuff. How do you have a situation where a guy jumps? This is not high school. In high school, you jump in a neutral zone, it's automatic penalty. And it's over. And in college football, you can jump and you got a chance to get back. So a guy moves forward and they have three guys in motion and they snap the ball, okay, to get the offsides. Well, yeah, all right, you got the offsides, but you also have three men in motion when you snap the ball. That's so offsetting. That's an offsetting penalty. It's not a dead ball. That should be offsetting at that particular point in time because you snapped it with they didn't blow the whistle until, after they let that play go, if you will. And then the other way, my God, they almost ripped the head off of the guy on the kickoff return. How do you miss that face mask? How do you have 8 guys on the field and the guy's head almost gets ripped off and they miss that?
It's such a bad crew.
It was terrible. They were terrible.
Tom, tell everybody about the Thom Abraham Show and what you got going on.
Well, the Thom Abraham Show every day, noon to 2. Mick Gillispie was on earlier this week. Go back and get the archives and see how he picked all the games. He was our guest picker and beat the big dog on Thursday. So we'll see how he did with all of that. But yeah, we're on every day, noon to 2. Of course, we've got the app at 97.7 ESPN The Zone. You search that on your app store. You can listen to it anywhere. And of course, at Thom Abraham Show on the Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. You can find us there as well at 97.7 ESPN, and the show is streamed live video there as well as the audio.
All right, that's Thom Abraham. Guys, don't forget that the original Bama Football Tailgate Show is presented by Tuscaloosa Hyundai. The Elantra, the Sinatra, or an SUV like the Kona, or Tucson, or Santa Fe. Tailgating doesn't get any better. Plus, no side stickers. And some of these are made right here in Alabama. And on some of the models, you got 0 interest for 5 years. So check it out, Tuscaloosa Hyundai. When we come back, we'll talk more Alabama and Georgia on the Bama Football Tailgate Show.